Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summit.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Nick Davis, the director of Ted Williams' Greatest Hitter Who Ever Lived, and you are listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is awesome. We have Nick Davis on the show with us, and Nick has done a lot of things you probably have seen. He kind of tends towards sports in a lot of his work, but he has done a bunch of things. He's done a story on fencing and the tale of the Rockaways, blood work. Maybe you saw his story. Gosh, there's just so many of them. If you go to his IMDb page, you'll be amazed at all the different projects he's worked on over the years. So thank you for doing that. And then thank you for telling the Ted Williams story. And, big reveal, we've got Jim DeFelice co-hosting with me today, the author of West Like the best-selling West Like Lightning. And he's also been a guest a couple of times on the show. So, hey, Jim, thanks for doing this with us.
Well, I was walking by the building, and this guy pushed me inside, and, what else? They said I have to do this podcast, or they won't let me out, so I'll just rock on.
Yeah. Hey, Nick, so you're a Mets fan.
Yes, I am.
And you took this project on.
Born and bred.
Yeah, no choice. Mets and Jets?
Well, I took this project. I'm a baseball fan. I am sort of a Jets fan, I guess, by blood, but I don't actually follow football, and in fact have almost nothing to say about football.
Perfect.
Yeah, but that's a New York connection there. That Queens, New York,
yes,
Mets, Jets.
No,
generation. So
I definitely grew up as a Mets guy, and Jets and Knicks also, not Nets. I don't know anybody who's a Nets fan. But there was something about 69 and Seaver and Namath that was just amazing to have those two guys. And in fact, my best friend growing up, he was a Namath guy and I was a Seaver guy, and we would argue over who was better. And it was sort of apples and oranges. Ultimately, Seaver, of course, was better. Yeah, I'm a Mets fan. That did not stop me from taking on the Ted Williams project for even a moment, in part because, as I told my friends in Boston, when I would come to them and say, I'm doing this, but I'm a Mets fan, 1986 notwithstanding, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes.
So Mets fans and Red Sox fans have quite a lot in common, and a lot of suffering for years and years and years, at least until 2004. So I took it on, and it was amazing. It's been great.
So how did that all come about, though? I mean, when you say you took it on, was it something that you had originally suggested, or or were you just out to antagonize Yankee fans? I mean,
I thought, what is going to make my Yankee fans really, really upset? American Masters is the PBS long-running series that does profiles, and they had never done actually a baseball player before, and they've only done, I think, one or maybe two previous athletes, both female athletes, actually, Billie Jean King and Althea Gibson. They came to me and said, someone had come to them with an idea and a teeny bit of starter money on doing Ted Williams, and would I be interested? And I jumped at the chance because Ted had always sort of loomed as a larger-than-life, fascinating figure. And I just thought, what an interesting story he must have. I always sort of had that kind of, I don't know about you guys, but like as a baseball fan, you kind of know, Ted Williams is a jerk. Is this a podcast? Can we curse?
You can curse if you need to.
Okay. You grow up thinking Ted Williams is an asshole. And then you get an assignment like this or a film like this, and you realize but how did he become that way? And what was behind it? And did he have a heart, or was he just a total asshole? And in fact, he was much richer and more complicated a subject than I had thought going in.
Yeah. And actually the film really kind of balances that, and your documentary really kind of show the evolution and that. Before we get too much further, though, we should mention that if people miss it on PBS or whatever, their local station, they could catch it. They could stream it off of. I streamed it off of Amazon, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other.
Stream it from Amazon or iTunes. PBS actually is still, I think, for the next few days, you can stream it on PBS for free. Mm-hmm. They extended it because Ted's birthday was August 30th. He would have been 100, but yeah, you can get it.
And he'd still be hitting. He would still have been hitting.
He would still be hitting. Yes, indeed. He was a fascinating guy and clearly an amazing hitter.
Yeah, he was singular in his focus, too. And I guess we love our heroes to be great. You know, someone like, I don't know, Elon Musk comes to mind right now, where he just absolutely outworks even the peak peer. He's just going to do more. So you think of like Stan Musial is considered to be a nice guy, a sweetheart of a guy, but he's and clearly one of the greatest hitters to ever walk the earth, but not the greatest, because there is a sacrifice when you kick everybody else off the tippity top of the tip of the mountain, and being an asshole is often one of those sacrifices, don't you think?
Well, but Nick points this out in the documentary, in talking about DiMaggio, and he doesn't really do a lot of contrast and comparing, but he does have enough of it, especially, which is surprising for a Mets fan, who's actually condescending to show Joe DiMaggio. But that was really good contrast, and maybe Nick, you talk a little bit about why that was, why that's important.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is, the image that Ted presented was, I am who I am. I'm a guileless guy. I care only about hitting, and what you see is what you get. And Joe, on the other hand, really did present an image that wasn't really entirely honest. He cared so much about his image. He groomed his image so meticulously. As his sister-in-law says in the film, he ironed his underwear. I mean, this is a guy who cared passionately about what other people thought of him. Ted was like, what you see is what you get. And what I would tell people is like, look, they were both assholes, but Joe pretended he wasn't an asshole. Right. And Ted knew he was and was like, hey, what are you going to do? Shut up, throw the ball, And so
there'd be a four-letter word or two or three in there. What he said,
2 or 3. No, he was an artistic swearer, as somebody said in the film. Like he could string together curse words you never heard of, and one of my favorites that actually didn't make it into the film, but I think I'd like to start using it around the house, is "you syphilitic son of a bitch."
That's good.
Say that a lot.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. But so I think to
very
your DiMaggio
descriptive,
point,
though.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. To your DiMaggio point, I feel like they were both really driven guys. And obviously I would think Musial would have been too, but maybe it was because he was from St. Louis or played in St. Louis, he didn't get the attention. And I think he was a simpler individual. It's interesting that he was the man and Ted was the kid. Ted never grew up, and he loved that he never grew up. He was guileless. He was like a 2-year-old.
Yeah, and you talk about some of his outbursts in the film, which seemed to continue. Although maybe did he mellow at the very end there, or is that just kind of more packaging or family or what?
No, he definitely mellowed. Although he, even in the final thing we hear before he dies, his daughter Claudia Williams, who gave us a wonderful interview, talked about how he would scream and yell and pound his fists, and they didn't care because they knew that was just who he was and that he loved them. But he did mellow, and I think he was able to see late in life that he hadn't been, putting it mildly, he hadn't been the best father, he hadn't been the best husband, and he tried to devote himself more and more to his kids towards the end of his life, and I think that was a loving act.
He was so incredible at hitting. And then you continue to go down the resume, and he's a Hall of Fame, several times Fisher. And I had a guy on the show the other day. He's a pilot out of San Diego, and I'm like, "Who's the best pilot out of San Diego?" And he takes the bait and says Charles Lindbergh, and I'm like, "What about Ted Williams?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" That's how incredible Ted Williams is, though. So talk a little bit about the history of the fighter pilot.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, he, barely had a high school education, but he was in such a good pilot during World War II when, Ted famously lost nearly 5 years of his career to two wars. Nearly everybody went to World War II, but very few baseball players went to Korea. But he fought in Korea. But in World War II, when he first signed up, he decided, all right, I want to be a pilot. And he became such a good pilot that they made him an instructor of other pilots at Pensacola. And he didn't see any action in the war, in World War II, but he did see action in Korea. And no less an expert than John Glenn said he was one of the finest pilots he'd ever seen. He flew as John Glenn's wingman a bunch of times. John Glenn flew as his wingman a bunch of times. He was an incredible pilot. And actually, sports writers of the time said he was 39-0 in Korea. He flew 39 without losing, although he had one very close call. So maybe he was 38-0-1 when was shot down.
He lost. That's a really good point about his career. I mean, he loses those roughly 5 years or 5 seasons rather. If he plays that whole time, where do you think he? It begs the question: where does he stand in baseball's greatest?
Yeah, I think I don't know what more. I mean, obviously the numbers would have been greater. He would have had an RBI record that would have surpassed Ruth and would have made it more difficult for Aaron to finally catch him. Let's assume he stays at 344, or maybe since it's his peak, maybe his batting average ends up a little bit higher. He misses 5 years. He's averaging about 30 home runs a year, 150 plus 521 gets you to, 671. If he's that close, maybe he hangs around a little bit longer and tries to reach Ruth. Although he didn't care that much about numbers like that. So I don't think he would have, if he thought his skills were diminishing, I think he would have retired. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I don't think it would have enhanced his legend any more than going off and fighting in 2 wars did. Mm-hmm. And I think that as an American icon, an American hero, his legend is only enhanced by the fact that he fought in 2 wars and did make that unbelievable sacrifice in the prime of his career. I mean, you can't even imagine a player today losing 5 years before the age of 34 to wars. It's just incredible.
And he wasn't happy about it either.
No. And that was a surprise to me. I mean, I always had this idea of he went and fought in 2 wars, no problem. But in fact, he resisted going to World War II. He didn't want to. He received some sort of quiet criticism from fans during the 42 season. A lot of players were signing up during the 42 season, but he was not Bob Feller signing up on December 8th, 1941. He thought, well, but I got to take care of my mom, and I want to earn money. I want to hit. But he did finally strike a deal with the Navy where he would enlist if they let him finish the season. They did, and so he won the Triple Crown and then went off to fight in the war. And then he resisted it in Korea. He had made a kind of somewhat lazy decision not to leave the Marines, because if he stayed as an enlisted man, he would get a little bit of money, and there was some sort of press. He would say, I'm Ted Williams, joined the Marines in 1947, 48, 49. So he stayed in the Marines, and therefore he was called up. He was in the active reserves, and he was called up during the war, and he really did not want to go, and he called a number of politicians and got John Kennedy to try and speak on his behalf. And ultimately he fought it but lost and went off to Korea, not too happily, but again, served with unbelievable distinction. But it sort of stuck in his craw. For the rest of his career, he would sort of moan and groan about how he didn't think that was fair, and, he got screwed and all this.
He also might have hurt that elbow even worse, though, right? Like back then, the medical care wasn't what it is now. Heck, who knows what would have happened if he would have had those 5 years?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, he banged his elbow during an All-Star game, running into a fence. I think it was 51 in the 51 All-Star game, and his elbow swelled up, and he missed most of the rest of that season. He was not the Iron Horse. And unlike DiMaggio, who famously said, there may be somebody out there who's never seen Joe DiMaggio play, so I have to play my hardest. It's like Ted's like, I'm not going to run that hard after this ball in the corner, it's going to be a double. And, if I take too much time, it'll be a triple. Big deal. So I don't know. I came to love him. I found him so charmingly honest and open about who he was, faults and all. I mean, he knew, he said at the end of his life, as a husband and a father, I struck out. He was nobody's fool, but he was also just really honest.
It was easy guy to like from a distance, but I guess if you're that close and maybe the target of one of his outbursts, things might get a little dicey. Did he have a lot of?
Yeah, he was terrifying. I mean, he could be very, very terrifying, even to his friends. And like if you said before, Pete, that he was a fisherman. He was a great fisherman. He's in 2 Fishermen's Halls of Fame, but he was not easy to go fishing with. I mean, like if the 3 of us went fishing, I don't know you guys well, but I'm assuming it would be pleasant, and we'd sit and put our rods.
Well, you guys would be fishing, and I'd be drinking a beer. So
I'd probably be drinking a beer too while Nick did all the fishing.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like that's my idea of fishing too. But with Ted, it was like, you're doing it wrong, and he would just yell and scream at poor Bobby Dorr or whichever Red Sox guy he'd gotten to come with him, and it was just not. It was not fun for anybody else to go fishing with this unbelievable perfectionist. I mean, that's the word that comes up again and again. He sought perfection in everything, in hitting, in fishing, in flying. And he wanted, whatever he did, he wanted to be the best, and he wanted to do it absolutely better than it had ever been done before.
Now, we know from the Ted Williams biography and the different accounts of him, he was just ravenous for knowledge from like Rogers Hornsby and the guys that came before him. Did he approach fishing in the same way? Was he just absolutely squeezing every bit of fishing knowledge out of the guys that were 20 years ahead of him?
Yes, although fishing is such a more solitary thing that I think he was more of a self-taught autodidact, and would sort of notice what worked for him, and he kept meticulous notes, of what he used as bait and what the fly was and when they were biting and when they weren't, and he had this log that he wrote everything down in for fishing. And really, really did study. And we talked to one of his fishing buddies, Stu Apty, never sure how to pronounce it, and who was a guy who became a Hall of Fame fisherman himself. And one of the reasons they got along so well is Stu Apty met him when he was just a college kid, and Ted was down there in 47 or 48. During the off season, they started hanging out together and fishing together. And Stu Apty never knew who he was. He never heard of Ted Williams. He wasn't a baseball fan. He was just this big, tall, lanky guy who was asking him where the best snook was. And so they started fishing together for 3 days. And then his mother came into Stu Apty about a week later and says, "There's some clown on the phone for you." Says his name is Ted Williams. He wants to go fishing with you. You're not fishing with Ted Williams. And Apty said, "Oh, Williams. Maybe that's what his name was. I'm not sure. Yeah, let me see. Maybe it's that tall guy." He had no idea who he was. And they could become friends that way, because Ted trusted him, that he didn't, want something from him. But getting back to your question, I think he taught himself how to fish, whereas he really learned from Rogers Hornsby and Lefty O'Doul and others how to hit.
Yeah, it looked to me like just from the documentary that he studied the game really in a way before video. Right now, there's a lot of video available. You have all sorts of statistics, and you can really, kind of zoom in on the pitchers and stuff. But he was doing the same thing, a couple of generations before anyone else. And a lot of it seemed like his own memory. And, in addition to the logs he must have been keeping.
Yeah, it was all memory. I didn't hear about him writing down stuff, but I know there's a story that also did make the film of Costas saying, "Oh yeah, the first game I ever went to when Bob Costas finally met Ted Williams." He said, "I remember I my first game was like 1958 at Yankee Stadium, and you were there, and I think you struck out." And And it was really shocking because Ted Williams never struck out. And Williams was like, yeah, and he named the pitcher, I can't remember who it was. He threw me a slider low and away and never saw it coming. And it was like, what? You remember this from 35 years ago? It was crazy, but he had at bats stored up in his memory bank, and he just remembered everything.
Were you able to get to Fred Calgary, the guy who pitched the end of the 406 season? He was the last guy out there. He's still alive. He's 99 years old. Were you able to grab him for the movie at all?
Wow, Pete, I sit before you chagrined. We did not even attempt to get Pete Calgary. I could answer you in a Joe DiMaggio-like way and said he was unavailable. Right. Or I could say, as Ted would say, fuck, we totally forgot. Didn't even check.
Well, hell, I want to hire Pete as my researcher. I got some stuff for him to dig up.
I always need money.
Yeah, that's good. I didn't even know that guy still walked the earth. I don't think he was the starting pitcher in game one. Was he?
No, I think he's game two. I think he was the guy up there, okay. And he didn't. I don't think he pitched the whole game, but yeah, he's and he's still around. He's the oldest living major leaguer. Yeah.
Wow.
But you know who they did get, and it was great, was the season, and you tell it so well in documentary, and I don't want to give everything away, but when it comes down to the last day of the season, that famous season, when we all know what he's going to hit, and he has a choice of sitting down and taking the asterisk in his mind, or just going up there and doing it. Again, the way that it's described in the film is so good that I won't give it away. But
thank you. But I viewed this in many ways as like, okay, so this is a film where baseball fans are going to know a lot of this.
Right, sure.
They're going to know that in 1941 he hit 406, and they're going to know probably that he had a chance to sit out, but he said, no, I'm not going to sit out. I'm going to play, and then he goes 6 for 8. So a lot of it is I hope it's in the telling. And then there are some, interesting surprises about his background, his mother, his father, all that stuff. But we made it knowing that a lot of the story, it's almost like Stations of the Cross. Like, you got to hit last game of 41. Okay, the last game of his career in 1960. What's he going to do? We know what he's going to do, but how are we going to tell it?
It's all how you mix the incense as you go through the Stations of the Cross. That's
exactly.
So who is it for then? I mean, it's obviously. I mean, is it for fans who know a lot about him? Is it?
It's for. Well, I mean, quite literally, it's for anyone. It's for American Masters, and they don't have a sports audience. So and by the way, it had a fantastic rating. It did more than double their normal ratings, I think, because their normal viewers watched it and seemed to love it. I mean, a lot of we had some private screenings and stuff, and non-baseball fans, I always asked afterwards, like, who's a baseball fan, who wasn't? And a lot of non-baseball fans came and loved it and got a lot out of it because he is such an interesting character. But the baseball fans responded to it as well, and that mattered deeply to me because I am a baseball fan. I didn't want it to feel like, oh, this again. And so that's why, that was sort of the challenge, was to make it for the baseball fan and the non-fan. I think we succeeded. If the ratings and reviews are any indication, I think we did a good job.
Let's test it a little bit. Hey, Jim, you're a Yankees guy, so when you watch this movie,
I'm the token Yankee fan here.
No, but I mean, you're not watching it from the point of view of like, I'm a rabid Red Sox person. You're watching it from someone who's an admirer and love of baseball player. And actually, we're reading Rob Neyer's book right now, and he talks about Ted Williams and that's how ubiquitous Ted Williams is. What are your thoughts on how the movie goes in terms of, through a Yankees fan's lens? How is it consumable for you?
Well, I thought it was great in that it's not just, and I think it's for more than a baseball fan, and because Nick and his team, because it takes an entire team to do a documentary.
It really does, and I have to say, I mean, we had a lot of really amazing people worked on it, and we also got really lucky in a couple of ways that I'll tell you about later. I
want to hear the luck, but because it does show the whole guy. It also shows a lot of what in a lot of ways that what he had to sacrifice, or at least the parts of himself that when I first came to it, I thought those were parts of himself that he cut off because he was just so focused. But then, in the finding out more about his biography, his early childhood and what happens with his brother, then it all kind of falls into place, and it made me admire the discipline, even more. Obviously, as a Yankee fan, you hear about it's the dichotomy of DiMaggio and Williams, and you always respect, you may hate the present Boston team no matter what, if you're a Yankee fan, but on the other hand, the Boston Red Sox are the only team that's really kind of worthy of such emotions from the Yankees, at least outside of the World Series. Therefore, everybody on the Boston must be great and fantastic, much more elevated. And of course, at the pinnacle, would be Ted Williams, and and a little bit below him, people like Big Poppy. Excuse me. Yes, Big Poppy, who had a hand. His production company was somehow. You guys were hooked in there or something? Yeah.
So we made this in partnership with Major League Baseball, and just sort of a little. Pardon the pun, inside baseball. The deal we had with Major League Baseball was they were going to help us in all kinds of ways, and they did. We had paid a flat fee for all the footage that they were able to give us. They were able to coordinate and get us to guys like Wade Boggs and Willie McCovey and Jim Cott and Joey Votto,
but not Fred Caligari.
Not Fred. No. Damn you, Fred Caligari. If only we'd gotten Fred Caligari.
I'm expecting Pete to bring him out of his closet any minute now. So here he is.
And the sequel will be the Fred Caligari story. But midway through, as we were raising money, they said, hey, Big Poppy has a production company. David Ortiz has a production company called Big Poppy Productions, and they're interested in doing this. In getting into sort of more high-end programming, why don't you sit down with them and see if they'd be interested? And they did. And really what we used them for, or what they were great for, was promoting the show, publicizing it, helping us raise the money. And then, Big Poppy sent out a tweet that, was seen by more people than, 40,000 of my tweets would have been. That was what they contributed. And it was great. I mean, it was really fun to have them on board. Interestingly, Big Poppy is skeptical. There's the famous legend in Fenway. There's a red seat out there in the right field bleachers, which is 502 feet from home plate, and allegedly denotes where Williams hit a home run in, I think, August of 46. And Poppy says that he and Manny used to take shots at that during batting practice, and they could never do it. And they never believed that actually Williams had ever done it. And even after making this film, Poppy is like, I still don't think he could have done it.
Well, what do you think? Could he have done it? Did he do it?
Yeah, I do think he could.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of hesitation in the back of his mind.
Well, okay, the hesitation had more to do with the fact that
the film. When I say no,
no, I think the hesitation had to do with the fact that actually the seat is not where the seat actually was, and they've shifted it around. But yes, I think he could have hit a ball 502 feet. Conforto just hit a ball 472 feet. If Michael Conforto could hit one 472 feet.
Well, it's a juice ball now, though, right?
Well, maybe. I don't know.
That's the theory.
Different launch angle. How much
launch angle?
Well, Ted Williams' launch angle, and you can see in you guys didn't go into that level of analysis, but you can see that he had a great launch angle then. That's one of the things he's doing. He knew.
Well, that's one of the interesting things is that all that stuff, all the analytics, both launch angle down to the minutia of what your swing is like, to just the sheer a walk's as good as a hit, which is what I was taught growing up. All the analytics and the OPS and slugging and plus on base percentage, that was Williams' game long before it was orthodox. And in fact, he took a lot of heat because Red Sox fans were like, so it's a couple of inches off the plate, swing at it. and Williams refused to because he knew he'd get in bad habits if he did that. And a lot of Yankee fans, when we were doing the press for this, Yankee announcers would say, like, well, DiMaggio would swing. Like, yeah, and then he would get in a bad habit, and DiMaggio didn't end up with a 344 lifetime average. And DiMaggio did, supporters like DiMaggio himself would say, look at the rings. How many rings? Which is what he rests your case. All right. But DiMaggio had Berra and that's a stacked team, and Williams really didn't.
No, absolutely. And Williams, depending obviously on the year, but most teams for Boston, they could pitch around Williams if they wanted. Did they do that a lot, or?
Yeah, they pitched around him a lot. I mean, he was always leading the league in walks and intentional walks. He refused to. He was stubborn. He was stubborn and hard-headed, and he was not gonna swing at a pitch outside the strike zone any more than he would, try and hit it to left field, which he did do a few times to beat the shift.
Right. And there was a Ted Williams shift. Where we think of shift, it's recent, but the truth is that teams have always shifted against them.
Well, it started with Williams. Lou Boudreau, the player manager of the Indians, put it on for the first time in the 46th season, I think, or maybe 48. But no, because the Cardinals did it in the series too. So it was 46. And Williams just a couple of times he'd slap the ball to left field, but he just didn't feel comfortable doing that. And he thought, well, I'll hit it through them or over them. He probably lost a few points on his batting average because of that. Not as many as Red Sox fans would have you believe, but he was a stubborn guy.
He also, I guess maybe this goes towards Jim a little bit too. He also was a successful author. I mean, his autobiography still sells for $20 on Amazon. There's a couple of guys in history who wrote the book. Arnold Schwarzenegger wrote the book for working out and bodybuilding. The Red Baron wrote the book for fighter pilots. Sun Tzu wrote the book for war. And Ted Williams wrote the book for hitting. I mean, if you don't have a command of that literature, you cannot proclaim to be an expert in that. Jim, what's wrong? How come you haven't written that book yet?
Because I can't hit a curveball. You can tell me where it's going. I can stand up there all day, know exactly where it's going to break, where it's going to end up, and darn if I miss it every single time. Every single time. Fastballs I'm okay with, but curveballs.
You can hit a fastball? You think you can still hit a fastball?
We were at a pitching range with one of those machines, allegedly throwing 90 miles an hour, which I'm sure it was probably about 50. But I was whacking them. But no kidding, you can underhand the curveball to me, I will miss it. I could swing 25 times at it and still miss it.
But what does it say for his ability as an author to write a book that's so seminal for a particular skill? I mean, it's incredible.
Well, it is incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And it's funny. I always sort of forget that is like, he had these three things: hitting.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at P. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
He had these three things: hitting, fishing, flying. But it's true that he did write the book on hitting with John Underwood. I mean, he had help, but yeah, and he was so far ahead of his time. But you saw the way, or if you've seen the film, which is available on DVD and streaming through Amazon and iTunes, if you see the film, you'll see Joey Votto has a copy of The Science of Hitting. Joey Votto, one of the great hitters of today, and Wade Boggs both swear by The Science of Hitting. And, Boggs, I don't know what his lifetime batting average ended up being, but somewhere in the 320s probably. And these guys, really worshipped that book. And it's a very good book if you're interested in hitting. And it's a book that every young hitter should have.
And I think that kind of one of the reasons, or maybe the proof of its validity or whatever, is that we've finally gotten to the point where, a lot of the analysis is kind of catching up with what he was doing, at the time. You can see the book even being used at the Little League level, right alongside now with the advanced video that's showing what the kids are doing and stuff. But maybe because it's such an obsessive study of success in terms of hitting. Maybe that's Pete, to answer your question, why it's still so valuable.
And he was really good. I mean, if you're going to follow the lead of somebody, he's one of the few people who's truly elite who wrote the book about that. I mean, Babe Ruth wrote a book and, it's more autobiographical, but if you want to get on base, there's never been a player more successful at getting on base. And then I think he's the second highest slugging percentage for his career. So not only did he get on base more than anybody ever, or at least more frequently, he also hit the bejesus out of the ball more. So take that, Yankee fans. He knew what he was doing.
Yes. Well, it's funny. Boggs said he was the greatest hitter who ever lived. And Votto said it's him and Babe Ruth. You can't really make a distinction. You gotta include Babe Ruth in that conversation. And it was important to me. The title of the film is Ted Williams, quote, the greatest hitter who ever lived. It's not Ted Williams, greatest hitter who ever lived. The film is not saying he was the greatest hitter who ever lived. The film is saying that is what drove him to be known as the greatest hitter who ever lived. I mean, he famously said that's all he wanted out of life, is to walk down the street and have people say, there goes the greatest hitter who ever lived. But a lot of us have those kinds of dreams, and how many come as close to Ted at actually accomplishing.
Could we say that Babe Ruth, though, if we're going to give Ted Williams credit for his nearly 5 years of service to the country, couldn't we also give Babe Ruth credit for his 5 years, ish, as a pitcher? That he didn't. And
in the dead ball era when no one was hitting more than 9 home runs, yes, right. I think that's
guys. Let's I love Ted Williams, and I have to say the film shows how distinguished and how great a player he was, and the hitter and whatever. But Babe Ruth is Babe Ruth, and you guys just embarrass yourselves when you talk about that.
No. I think Pete's point is that you're going to give Ted the extra home runs. You got to give Babe some credit to extra home runs too. This is why my wife would get furious at me. She was like, "Why are you making such a big deal about these quotation marks?" I was like, "Honey, he wasn't the greatest hitter who ever lived. I'm not willing to say that." I think there's Babe. I think Babe is like baseball Jesus. Like you don't. But just the fact that Ted's in the conversation is kind of there's nobody like Babe Ruth.
Yeah, no.
It took you two and a half years to do this, Nick. Take us, what all is involved in, if we can have a little inside baseball on documentaries here. I mean, from one perspective, 2.5 years to working on a project is a huge amount of time, and yet from another perspective, it's pretty to see the finished product. It's like, wow, this only took them 2.5 years to pull together.
Yeah, I think so. It's 2.5 years start to finish. It was at the 2015 World Series, the Friday of Game 3, the Syndergaard. I don't know, not that you guys have memorized what happened in the 2015 World Series, but the Mets were involved. Friday of the 2015 World Series, Game 3, I got a call from Michael Cantor, the head of American Masters. He said, "Are you interested in Ted Williams? We're thinking of doing Ted Williams. Can you meet on Monday with a man named Al Tapper, who's from Mass, and he's going to put up some of the money, and he's interested in doing this?" And I said, "Yes, of course, I'd be happy. Oh my God, that sounds great." A couple hours later, Michael Cantor, who is now my best friend, calls back and says, "By the way, tickets fell in my lap for Game 5 of the World Series on Sunday night. Do you want to go?" Michael's a Mets fan. I'm a Mets fan. I said, "Jesus, Michael, I love you. Keep calling me." Yes. So we go to Game 5 of the 2015 World Series, which is, as you may recall or may not recall, for 2 hours and 22 minutes, the greatest game ever played. Matt Harvey mowing them down. We're up 2-0. Should have gotten more runs. Cespedes' selfishness came out, didn't take himself out of the game. Foul ball off his knee, whatever. We could have added to our lead. Then Harvey somehow berated Terry Collins into allowing him to come out in the ninth inning. Anyway, long story short.
You mean Terry Collins didn't do his job as manager and take him out when he should have taken him out?
When he wanted to take him out. Terry Collins proving that he was as weak-willed as we always thought he was. The Mets lose the game in the series. Michael and I, very devastated and hoarse, meet Al Tapper the next day. And Al described growing up in Worcester, Mass. in the 40s and 50s and having worshipped Ted Williams in a way that, I worshipped Tom Seaver, but not like this. And Ted did have this incredible, larger-than-life, godlike quality to the fans in New England in the 40s and 50s. I thought, okay, this guy is more interesting than I ever thought before. I would love to make this film. So that was November of 2015. For about a year or so, we shot 4 interviews, including Jack Fisher, the man who gave up the final home run, Ben Bradley, who is the brilliant biographer of Ted, Claudia Williams, and Bob Costas, and did those 4 interviews while we were raising money. And then once we had all the money, it was about April of 2017. And then we went into full-scale production, did the rest of the interviews, gathered all the material, and started the edit. And edited through, for about 22, 24 weeks, which is a good amount of time. But it, it's not 2.5 years. So in some ways it took 2.5 years, but the real making of the thing was 22 or 24 weeks. And then I mentioned luck. This crazy thing happened, right? When you finish a film, you what's called lock picture. Right, you lock the picture and then you take it into an online and do all the finishing stuff, and for a very expensive process where you colorize it and fix all the color and do the final sound mix and everything. And on the Thursday before the Friday when we locked, I got an email out of the blue from a man named Bill Murphy in Massachusetts who was 78 years old. And he said, "Oh, I heard about your documentary. I was an art student in Boston in 1960 in September, and I took my 8mm camera color footage out to Fenway Park on the last game of Ted Williams' career, and I shot all this footage that no one's ever seen before, and it's color footage of his final home run. Would this be of interest to you?"
What?
No, not at all.
No.
Exactly.
Hang up.
No, right. Stop. No, we're nearly finished. Where were you 6 months ago?
We locked the picture already.
Right. Well, we hadn't. We did have a day and a half left. But I got on the phone with a guy, and it was incredible. And his footage makes that final sequence. I mean, it's color footage. And he had the foresight, being an art student, to walk around the stadium and get every at bat from a different angle. It was just an absolute godsend. Pushed the schedule for the finishing back because we weren't airing until July. Got the footage in and re-edited that final sequence. And so that was the end of the 2.5 years, was this incredible stroke of kismet coming out of nowhere. Things like that just kind of kept happening, actually. It was really, really, I have to say, I mean, as a huge baseball fan, it was a dream project from start to finish. And I am so happy that it's out there in the world now for people to see.
You get to the end of the film, you do have to account for some of the weirdness that happens at the end of Ted's life. There's the beauty, of course, of 1999 on the All-Star game, and "Where's Gwynn?" He's yelling on the mound, and Tony's like, I'm right here, and just that moment where all the players just the fans are gone at that moment. They're all there with Ted, and it's his last, it's really his last thing on the stage. But then there's also, John Henry, and a lot of folks are hard on John Henry. But look, someone's going to do that for Ted. It may as well be his kid. And whether or not John Henry takes advantage or not, I don't know that Ted cares that much. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is the tragedy. You didn't really get into it too much, but the tragedy that John Henry dies so fast after his pop. It's just such a crazy thing where, he's trying to be a minor leaguer. And then literally he gets the kind of cancer where the doctor's like, "Hey, you're dead, by the way. You got days to live." Yeah. So talk a little bit about how you negotiate all that craziness.
Well, I would not want to be Ted Williams' son. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I think it would have been incredibly hard. Obviously it's hard to be the offspring of someone hugely successful regardless, but especially someone with this kind of titanic temper, weirdness and weird temperament. I think that John Henry, so he had it from a certain perspective. It was kind of tough. Another perspective, come on, he's Ted Williams' son. How hard can life be? But, carving out something to do for himself and with his own life, I think was always a problem for him. And he hit upon the memorabilia business as a way to make money for him and his dad, and then did try, and the Red Sox were gracious enough to let him play in the minors for a little bit. And it's very sad what happened to John Henry. He died about a year and a half after his dad. But, and I don't know whether you mentioned it, but you dropped out a little bit, but the cryonics affair was definitely, it's a touchy subject, in part because the family knew about it. But to the fans, it's like, oh no, Ted Williams is dead. And wait, what? His body is put on ice and he's flown to Arizona? What is going on? And it was such a sort of scandal and a shocking way for his life to end that a lot of his friends and fans were just sort of outraged at the family. But two things. One, we only have an hour to tell the story of the man's life. And I was interested really in the man's life and who he was as a person. I wasn't interested in the scandal, or I didn't have time to be interested in the scandal of what happened to him after he died. Fascinating and could make its own film. But that wasn't the film I was going to make. And I also knew that approaching it this way was the only chance I had of getting Claudia Williams to consent to an interview, was going to her and saying, I'm not interested, whether he signed the piece of paper, didn't sign the piece of paper, all this stuff about the cryonics. Like, I just want to know who he was. I want to be able to tell your dad's story for who he really was as a person. And once she understood that, she was like, well, then let's come on down and let's talk. And we had a wonderful interview with her. And she was, I think she's magnificent in the film. It's so emotional and accessible. And also kind of, you get a sense from just listening to her what he was like. Mm-hmm. You feel him in her in a really cool way. Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to her and to John Henry.
Did it take a while to get her to agree to be interviewed, or what was?
Yeah, it took some doing. Well, the process was getting Ben Bradley on board, and then Ben was wonderful, and it hadn't ended so well for Ben and her. Although I think he's very fair to Ted in his book, more than fair. I think he's loving and appreciative of Ted and all his complexity. It may just been the sheer fact that he spent so much time on the cryonics because it was more recent, than our film, and so Claudia just didn't like that, and Ben was very helpful and said, don't go to Claudia first, go to her husband and talk to her husband. So I went to Eric Abel, his son-in-law, who had been a lawyer for Ted, and talked a lot to him and said, here's our approach, how best to approach her. And he helped. And then they all saw what we were doing and that we came in peace, we just wanted to tell the guy's story. And she, in the end, was very, very gracious and wonderful and gave us a lot of time. And then Eric has been very appreciative. Eric, the son-in-law, has been very appreciative of the film itself.
I want to point out that you can buy The Science of Hitting, Ted Williams' book, for $268 on Amazon. That's how impactful this man's life is. And yeah, the end is very crazy. It's you think it's the end with the home run in 60, but then it's not, because he got that great moment in 99 and he's a manager of the Rangers and all this, and it just kept being this incredible body of work throughout his life. It's so fantastic. And you guys want to find out more about Nick, you can go to Nick Davis Nick Davis Productions on Facebook. You can also hit me up and we'll get you over to him. But the movie is fantastic, and it's not the only movie you've done. I would love to talk about Blood, Sweat, and Gears, but we'll run out of time on that one. But what is next for you?
Well, it's too early. I'm sorry to say I haven't signed anything yet, but I've got some very exciting things that I'm working on. Very hopeful of doing something maybe not quite as joyful as Ted Williams was, but it was close. And then we'll come back and I'll talk to you again, Pete. This has been so fun to talk to both of you.
Yeah. Thank you. And also make sure you guys check out best-selling author Jim DeFelice's latest book, West Like Lightning. I've read it cover to cover, fast, and it's incredible. You guys will love his book as well because Jim is good at what he does.
And how much is that going to cost me now?
Nothing. I do it because I genuinely love the book. Come on. You know what? Everybody give me 5
I want to
stars.
go get that book, and then I want Jim to go to also, in addition to my Facebook page, I think that my actual website, nickdavisproductions.com,
there you go.
might be an easier place, and I should have said that rather than the Facebook thing. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So yeah, make sure you guys go to nickdavisproductions.com, and you can look him up on IMDb. As long as you guys are looking him up and looking at his movies, that's the main thing, because what you create is incredible. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap this thing?
Well, okay, one other question for you guys.
Yeah.
There were sort of, I had mentioned luck before. We shot some slow motion recreations of Ted hitting during the film. And those have not come up in our conversation. And I wanted to ask you guys, as I asked audiences sometimes when it wouldn't come up in the Q&A, whether or not people noticed those, they didn't think about them, or was it all so integrated that they didn't even know there were recreations shot?
I thought that I thought they were integrated pretty well. I don't know whether that was, and I didn't really think about whether it was an ethical issue with documentarians or that sort of thing. I was so engrossed. To be honest, I was so engrossed in the movie, and the way I was taking the movie was more as, this is for a general audience. If you are a real baseball fan, it's great because it reminds you of things that you didn't know, as well as augmenting those things. So I didn't, to be honest, I wasn't thinking about,
That's great. That is, I have to say that's an answer I'd love to hear. I'm also happy to hear, oh yeah, there was too much of that or whatever. But one of the things that I thought as we were making it was going to be more of an issue was, well, who'd you get to swing the bat? and nobody seemed to ask or care about it.
Hey, who'd you get to swing the bat?
Well, I'll tell you. For a long time, we weren't permitted to talk about it because the concern on the part of the team was you don't want to saddle somebody with this idea that they think they're Ted Williams. But it was a kid in the Houston Astros organization named Kyle Tucker who had an incredible minor league season this year. And I have a feeling he's going to be their starting left fielder or right fielder next year. And he also grew up reading the science of hitting. And
he's got a sweet swing.
He's got a sweet swing. And I think he hit like a game-winning home run to send them into the minor league World Series just a week or two ago. His mom has kept up with me, and he's had an incredible. And what's interesting, so we weren't allowed to say who it was, and then he goes to spring training for his first time this year with the Astros on their 40-man roster, and because of his swing, the players on the Astros started calling him Ted.
Nice.
And put as his nameplate in his locker room, put Ted. And at that point, the Astros said, "Oh hell, you can talk about it." And so I was prepared to talk about it. Nobody ever asked me, and so
how'd you find him? How'd you get hooked up with him?
That was one of the great benefits of being hooked up with Major League Baseball. Is I went to them and said, my first thought was Corey Seager. I always thought Corey Seager is a sweet swing for the Dodgers, and then you watch Corey
Seager. A Mets fan naming a Dodger.
I'd also thought briefly of Daniel Murphy, but then when you watch this guy's swing, you realize that doesn't look like Ted Williams at all.
No, it doesn't.
It really doesn't. But I just love wondering, what did those old time ball players? What was it really like to be with them? And I thought Seager, but anyway, not at all. And so Major League Baseball said, we're going to canvass our scouts and talk to you. We'll get back to you. And they came back and said, take a look at this high school kid. And it was pretty sweet. Cool.
We have, from my hometown, we have a baseball player. He's just at the major league level, kind of right in between AAA and the major leagues. His name's Willie Calhoun. He plays for the Rangers. And that kid is so good in the minors. He was goofing around, at the high minors going, I'm going to hit a home run in my Babe Ruth imitation swing. And did. So
really?
Yeah, totally true. There's even video
Willie
of it.
Calhoun?
Willie Calhoun. And he could never have been the Ted Williams guy because live, tall, and white is the opposite of what Willie Calhoun is. But he is a hell of a ball player. And it's neat to hear it. Oh, I was going to give you my answer to your swing question. So when I do, especially when I do research, I'll probably have a couple different devices in front of me, so I'm watching and everything else. And I remember seeing the slow-mo stuff, and here's where I went. I thought, oh, man, the video is so different now compared to what it was back in Ted's era where they would do that hero shot, with them swinging overhead, what I'm talking about. And I'm like, I wonder, and I always get lost in those things. Like, what was the one from the 60s and what's it going to be 20 years from now when they, when they, remember when they used to have the shot just outside of the batter's box and you're like, how did they get that shot? And like, there's just a dude sitting there with the camera and you're like, what a dangerous place to be.
When you see those pictures and the old photographers are there, they're like between the on deck circle and the home
crazy.
Plate. What a crazy!
Yeah.
I mean, God, I wouldn't do that. What is the name of the old guy who's 99 years old? I want to write this down too.
Caligari, and I'm saying Caligari as best I can. And let me.
Fine.
Okay, and I think it's Ted or not Ted. It's not Ted. It's I'll tell you what it is.
He's going to be in Nick's next documentary. I'm waiting for the Seaver film because that obviously you're obviously the guy that has to do that. And
well, unfortunately, they are proceeding with the Seaver film without me.
Pete, we got to take care of that.
Yeah, I know.
I've told them. I said I'm happy to help. I'll lay cable. I'll do whatever you want. I'll get someone's coffee.
They probably have some Minnesota guy,
No, they got a New Yorker. It's Ed Burns.
Okay. What's in good hands then?
New Yorker in a long time. That's man. So
Fred Caligiuri. There's a whole lot of I's. Yeah.
All right. Good.
It's Giuri at the end, and he definitely is still alive. So, that's funny. I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that, but it is interesting, and he is a relevant guy in that story since he was around.
No, totally. It's great. I mean, we had a limited number of interviews. Sure. There's only so many people you can interview. But
how long did you talk to Ted's daughter for, and how much did you use?
We used a lot, and I think I don't even remember. Probably 3 hours.
Okay.
3 or 4 hours. But we used a lot of it, and she was great. I spent a whole day with her basically.
That's fantastic. Hey man, thank you so much for coming on. Open mic anytime you want to come on. Heck, if you got someone you want to bring on as a co-host, I'm glad to do that with you too. Like Jim and I just did. Yeah, so the point is to tell these stories, and heck, we just covered an hour easy without even trying hard. So. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you, Jim, for doing this with me.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks.
It was really fun. It was great to talk to you both. Have a pleasant morning, afternoon, wherever you are.